So I think that kind of collaboration where, we try and understand and make sure that things run smoothly, but there's also that eye that comes and looks at things and says, this is a bit different. Why do you do it this way? And try to understand it from a different perspective is extremely valuable.
Welcome to this episode of Divergent, and in this episode we're going to be talking about the realities of doing research in Africa and how the culture is changing over there. And in this episode we've got a really special guest who's flown all the way from Nairobi to be on the podcast. So welcome, Kim Matu.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
How is London treating you?
It's very nice. I really enjoyed being here. Everyone told me, the weather would be gloomy, but I guess I'm lucky. It's been really nice.
Well, it has been torrential rain today, so
yeah, but not too bad. It's been nice, and it's easy to get around, so it's beautiful.
Anything that surprised you about being here?
Well, the food is really nice, and there's quite a lot of variety of where to eat. But it's and I was just surprised by the number of dogs that I see on the streets.
Yeah,
everybody seems to have a dog. Some really beautiful dogs out there.
Oh, yeah, because you've got 5 dogs, haven't you?
Yeah, I have 5 dogs. I should probably not have 5 dogs, but I have 5 dogs. But the breeds we have back home and the breeds that you have here. There seems to be quite a lot of sausage dogs, but we tend to have bigger dogs back home.
Yeah, there's a lot of small dogs on the tube in Hamburg. So that's a bit of a trend that's going on. Thank you so much for being on this episode. It'd be great if you could start off by introducing yourself, telling us a bit about who you are, what you do, and a bit of your background in the industry.
All right, super. Thank you. My name is Kim Matu. I've been working with the Mix now for the last 2 years. And my role is to support the work that the Mix is currently doing for its client across the African continent. Just based on the various work that we've been doing, most of it has been quant, qual, and a lot of it has been what would consider innovational research, where we get to immerse ourselves with the culture, with the people, with the respondents, and that allows for an environment that is open and free for people to share information. That is quite different from what we do, other research organizations do, or traditional research. So that's really what we've been doing over the last 2 years. It's very innovative work. It's very nice, very enjoyable. If anything that the Mix is thinking of planning and doing in Africa, my job is to pretty much make sure that it's completed successfully with as little hiccup as possible.
Yeah. I think, so I hadn't worked in any African markets before working with you. And so obviously the last year has been amazing for me because I've been able to obviously go to Nairobi and experience what the culture's like there, and also in South Africa with Johannesburg, and it's been some amazing experiences. But I guess I didn't really know what to expect when I was working in African markets. I'd worked in lots of other continents, but for some reason just never worked in Africa. Mm-hmm. What do you think are some of maybe the assumptions or misconceptions that people have around maybe the culture in Africa or doing research in Africa? Anything that you've kind of come across?
Well, I think from just an understanding of the African market, people tend to classify Africa or the countries in Africa as one market. There is a bit of feeling or view that South Africa tends to be different than the other African markets, which by a large degree it is, just because it's more developed. It's got better infrastructure. It's easy to get around. In Johannesburg, in Cape Town, there's a lot of manufacturing there, so the economy is a bit stronger. But still, all the other African countries are very different. So we are similar and also very different in many ways. Some parts of our cultures are similar, but they're also quite different. So when you look at the legal, the social, the economic aspects of the continent, the level of education, the traditions around, they're quite different, and therefore it's quite naive to kind of cluster everybody and the entire continent as one. So to give you a better example is that we tend to really kind of we've got some sort of social inclination just based on history. So you'll find that East Africa and quite a bit of South Africa, that tends to kind of relate more towards the British, and you look at West Africa, that's more French speaking, just because of the roots. And then you've got some pockets of Portuguese here and there. So you'll have Angola, you'll have Madagascar. And all these countries are all very, very different. Then you've got the northern part of Africa, which has got a bit of Arabic influence. So as a continent, it's quite diverse, but yet we are quite similar in terms of some of our traditions.
And what are some of maybe the cultural shifts that you've been seeing across potentially in Kenya, but also maybe in different parts of Africa? Is there anything that you've been seeing changing, and why do you think that might be happening?
So I think, first of all, over the last couple of years, the education levels in Africa have really improved. The internet and use of technology across the continent, especially for young people, has really improved. If you go across Africa, you've got a lot of people who are quite vibrant on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook. So there is always that culture is changing. It's really influenced a lot by the global north, if you would call it. But there's also a generation that is also looking at the east, where there's a lot of anime, especially the much younger generation. But there are very many things from a cultural perspective that really influence Africa in terms of our music, our food, our culture, what we are going through from a social point of view. But we want to be identified as vibrant, outgoing, not too traditional. But we also want to maintain, that whole identity that we are Africans. We are smart. We know the solutions for Africa. We can create beautiful brands, with some sort of African touch. And there's a lot of pride in being African at this point. You'll find some of us just have full African names, something that's also quite new. So there's a lot of pride. There's a lot of pride in being Africa. And we are hoping that this pride and this kind of vibrancy will continue.
And you mentioned about the younger populations, and you're saying like the rise of trends such as anime.
Yeah.
And I think it's something which you told me, which the average age in Africa is 22 years.
Yeah.
What impact do you think that has in maybe how research is done, or kind of the influences on kind of the culture in terms of having such a young population? Any considerations you have to think about?
Well, the idea is that, the traditional forms of research, which is, here's the questionnaire, go out there, look for this particular person, ask them these kind of questions, and then, analyze and share with the client. That might not necessarily tend to work. I think you have to think of it from more of what is the most engaging, sophisticated way of trying to tap insights from people who are young. So you need to have some sort of, and this is what I like, especially for the work that we've been doing, is where we immerse ourselves, with the culture. We go out there to nightclubs, to people. We see how they socialize, how they drink, what they wear, what are the reasons that drive them to probably buy certain things and be seen in a certain environment. That is more, it's a lot better than opposed to just having a questionnaire. And of course, if you want then to refine the insights, then you definitely need to have some of these tools. But the idea is that even as you operate within Africa, you have to be very, very careful around making people feel inclusive, getting their views in a way that is not traditionally structured.
And what would you say are maybe some of the challenges that you think are happening, or that you've come across in research at the moment, or anything which you would really love for us to be able to tackle, or just to work towards and overcoming in that way?
So predominantly, just because of the infrastructure that we have in Africa, we've seen a lot of people trying to do things on mobile. That is important, and that's good, because a lot of the young people, they use Instagram, and it's easier for them to be able to give you the feedback. The only challenge that I've noticed there is, that these panels tend to be recycled, the same kind of people being asked the same questions or different questions, incentivized to, with cash rewards. And when you do it that way, then sometimes you're not sure whether the insight insights are driven out of a desire to have money or a desire to actually genuinely share the insights that someone would like to share. So I think when we look at the way we we improve research is by, as I mentioned, we have to make sure that when we are speaking to young people, we speak to them in their natural settings. So, for example, if it's at a party, that would be a nice place to speak to them. If they're in school and enjoying their break, that would be a nice place to speak to them. If they're with family and friends, that would be a nice place to speak to them. So you have to try and make sure that the research is really immersed in the day-to-day activities that people are doing, as opposed to just pulling them to the side and saying, now let's do it like this. You gather more insights when you're among them, when you're one of them, when you're very comfortable, you dress like them, you ensure that you're in the spaces that they find comfortable, then that's when you'll get very good insights.
And I think that's something which I've always wanted to do in research, in terms of, I don't think good research can be done just from sitting at a laptop. And like even with the work that we've done in Nairobi, if someone gives you the question of what is nightlife like in Nairobi, you're never going to really truly understand unless you go on a night out.
Correct.
And I think that's something which I'm really happy that I've been able to do with you, is that really understand what it's like to be in those spaces and immerse myself with people. But also I feel like you have such better conversations, and people aren't kind of on guard or they don't want to impress. They're literally telling you how it is. And I think one of the things that I always say is that in those conversations, I feel like I can ask the obvious and dumb questions, because I am just from the outside. I don't know anything, and asking the reasons, why have you got that bottle on your table, or why are you pre-drinking with your friends in these spaces, or why do you eat meat before you go out? These things which for me feel quite strange, but for other people they're quite familiar. So I have massively enjoyed. Obviously, it's been fun doing the nightlife, but just being able to be in those spaces and feel like I'm actually doing proper research, if that makes sense.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And I think one of the things that I love about the work we've done is how collaborative it has been. For me, who lives in Nairobi and who travels across Africa, there are certain aspects of our cultures and our communities that I take for granted just because I was born there, I live there. They seem very normal to me. They seem sort of obvious. But when you have somebody else who's looking at it from an external view, then they will tend to notice a few things that would surprise them, that would make for good insights, good conversations, that would actually go into building some good brands. That for us, these are just basic things. So I think that kind of collaboration where, we try and understand and make sure that things run smoothly, but there's also that eye that comes and looks at things and says, this is a bit different. Why do you do it this way? And try to understand it from a different perspective is extremely valuable.
Yeah, basically being annoying and asking all the questions constantly.
Asking all the questions, but being friendly, sharing a meal, sharing a drink, just being completely immersed in just the day-to-day lives of what people are doing. That way it's also less what would I call it, invasive. It's quite welcoming, because we in Africa love people. We love music, we love dancing, we love sharing meals, we love conversation. So as long as it's done in a way that it's inclusive, it's nice, and it's within an environment that we like, then the insights will be fantastic.
I think it's very much about making those connections and making sure they're actually real connections. Correct. And they're not just, I'm having this conversation with you because I want to get answered X, Y, Z. It's more than that. Exactly. In that sense.
It's also the process of trying to genuinely know someone, build relationships, get to understand their life from their point of view, how they see it, how they live it, what's important to them. And what are some of the aspirations and dreams that they have. And the way you do that is by, having these, wholesome conversations and just being open to learning different people's perspectives and views. And I think the way we've done it has been exceptionally well.
And so you've been in the insight industry for a long time, longer than me.
More than 10 years.
And I guess, what have you seen maybe change over those years? That you've been in insight, or any kind of, I guess, things that you've seen change, but any frustrations you've maybe had as well?
I wouldn't say a lot has changed. I think what we do and the kind of partnership we have with with the Mix is very, very different, just because of the way we approach the research and the way we conduct from planning, from just ensuring the local insights are really had and contributed to at the point where we're writing the brief and we are thinking of how to execute. I think that is something that we don't see very regularly with very many other research organizations, which are usually very prescriptive around how things should be done. She's like, here's a questionnaire, please run it. These are the questions that we need, without necessarily thinking, is the tool necessarily going to get the insights that we would want? And to some level of degree is always even a copy paste of the same questionnaire asked across various brands or various surveys, which is not really innovative. It's just very, very prescriptive. I think that is, I've not seen a lot of change, and I understand why. Some of the talent that comes, that's within the research space in most of Africa, moves around, right? There are not very many research firms that get quite a lot of work from, I would say, the global. So it's the larger ones, and talent moves around. So the people at some point writing the briefs and executing the briefs tend to have worked in the same agencies, followed the same processes. So the learning and innovation pool, and it's quite small.
Yeah, I can imagine that must be quite frustrating. If I don't know if you want any fresh thinking or if you just want innovation, if you're just finding it's the same people moving between the same places with the same ideas, then how is anything new ever going to come about from that?
Well, it's difficult. So that's why when you have new and new organizations, new people who've got a different way of thinking, a different way of looking at how to collect insights, are willing to come to the ground and really immerse themselves in the culture and in the people and be able to learn, and not just only at a junior level, but at an extremely senior level. Like I have seen, with the Mix, it's really important, and I think it's something that is really encouraged. It gives you a different understanding and appreciation, not only of the data collection process or the people that you're interviewing, but very many other things that you see around. Like we were discussing a pineapple being viewed as a very tropical fruit, but for us on Thika Road, we sell them. They're sold there every day. They're in our supermarkets. We don't see it as a tropical fruit. We just see it as a fruit. So there are various things that I would like and I would love to see changed within the research industry. But I think it's every organization to set its path around how do we serve our clients, how do we make sure that our clients get the maximum value for what they're paying, and then for you to do that, you need to be a bit unconventional to get the best.
Yeah. I think one of the most surprising things that I saw when I was out in Nairobi was, I guess it's kind of the same, but a bit different to what we have in here in the UK, is that connected to every kind of local bar, there's also a butcher's.
Yeah.
Which is, I think for us, I have experienced nightlife over here where, you might get like a burger or a hot dog at the end of the night, but to have a full-on butcher's next to a bar, which is going to be able to chop up meat for you and serve it for you right and then, that was something which I had never seen or thought about. And I think that also gave us good learnings of how people start their nights and like all the other things, all the other touch points they might have, or all the other things connected to it. So that was, probably one of the most interesting things that I saw from it. So
good music, good meat, a good beer, good company. They all tend to be served in the same place.
I think Nairobi nightlife has nothing on the UK or London nightlife, what I've experienced. So
it's nice. I've gone out here a couple of times and I've enjoyed the food. I've enjoyed the company. I just found it a bit strange that I always have to go to the bar to ask for, as opposed to sitting down and someone serving you. But anyway, it's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Different.
We did think that was probably going to die out with COVID, but but it's gone back to kind of like standing at the bar waiting to get your pint. So
but it's all right. The people are friendly. It's quite warm, so.
Warmish.
Warmish.
And you mentioned earlier about the fact that people are proud to be African and they want to celebrate their heritage and they want to celebrate their traditions and keep them up. And I think some of the work that we've been doing with brands, there is a focus on maybe kind of going back to the local roots and thinking about local. Do you think that is genuinely what people want? Do you think they want local brands that are locally inspired? What do you think about that?
I think there has to be a balance of both local and international, because people want to stay within, they want to stay true to who they are and their culture and their roots, but they also want to be seen as sophisticated and international and outgoing. And, so it has to be a balance. I wouldn't say that, we go back and pick a brand that was extremely good. And no. It would have to be creating something that's new, that kind of traverses culture, and allows people to feel all inclusive. So it's got a bit of African culture, and it stands out at an international level. I think that's what people are looking for. Pretty much, people are also looking for some sort of, brand that gives them some sort of status. Right? Its status is big in Africa, so people want to be seen, they're moving ahead, from a point of financial, job-wise, career-wise, family-wise. They want to be seen that, that they're progressing. So, and alcohol, specifically, when you go into bars, the type of drink that someone takes is really more of a status symbol most of the time than, yeah.
And do you think that's always been the case, or has that been a recent shift in terms of, status being so important to people?
I think status has always been important. Probably my dad's generation didn't put too much emphasis to it. They just drank what was available. But right now, I think there's a lot of status in Africa, and this is really driven by social media. And when you look at it, you see it everywhere in terms of, just fashion, in terms of education. It's just the whole idea of, what's available on Twitter, on TikTok, on Instagram. So the world is really, really open, and I think Africa is real. Young Africans are realizing that, and they want to be included in the various conversations that are happening, and they also want to be seen as, we can contribute to the growth of Africa, but still maintain our identity as Africans. Yeah.
And most of the work that we've done together has been based in kind of those big markets. So, for example, Nigeria, South Africa, and Kenya. Yeah. But what about some of the other countries that are there? What would you say are maybe some of the differences that maybe we're not seeing, or we're not picking up on by not being in those spaces?
I think the briefs that we get that we have executed on pretty much have been Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa, as you've mentioned. And traditionally, from a research point of view, those have been the markets that have had the highest volume of research. But that's not to mean that they're the only market, or that there are other markets. There's Uganda, there's Tanzania, there's Ethiopia, there's Senegal, there's Cameroon, there's Zambia, Zimbabwe, Malawi. So all these other countries have got humongous youth population. They've got a lot of people who have the means and the ability to be able to, to buy some of the brands that we are researching on in these three markets. So I think the idea is to also think of how to, include them in the insights. Some of them are quite unique, like Tanzania. They speak one language, Swahili. They've got one of the biggest local artists in Africa. And, it would be good to at least understand what are some of the trends that are happening there. You will find some things that you already know, but you might find some things that are quite unique to those individual markets, based on the way they're influenced by, their culture, their society setups, the languages they speak. So it would be very, very important to also include some of them in the briefs.
And have you seen any change in the focus or the interest in the briefs? So maybe people are more interested in focusing on this particular topic or issue. Have you seen any patterns that have been coming up?
I think a lot of emphasis has been made between the ages of 18 to 29, or say about below 35. There's a lot of research that's currently happening there, especially from an FMCG point of view. Everybody is really interested in that, in that age group, but you can really understand why. If you are able to market yourself and to kind of show that your brands are cool and resonate with that age group, and you maintain that over a period of time, then you will get the brand loyalty to probably sustain your brand. But if they don't see it as cool, as something they would like, as something that is close to their hearts, then you might find that those brands may not really exist in the form that they exist today, 10, 20 years down the line.
Yeah. And are there any things that you think people are missing out on that they're not looking into? You think, that's something which is big and happening and we need to focus on it right now. anything that you think is happening, any big cultural shifts that are happening in Africa that you think are important for people to be aware of?
I just think the cultural awareness and awakening that is happening in Africa is everybody who comes into the African continent has to understand that the people who live in Africa, they've got big dreams. They're looking for financial stability. They're looking for economic stability. They're also looking for they're quite involved, especially in terms of how governments are run, and they're very in tune with government policy. And they're also they're watching how Africa is being run, who is coming into Africa, why are they coming into Africa, what do they want, how do they want it, how are they speaking to us, how are they interacting with us, is it from a point of, is it from a point of just trying to include us in what they're doing, or is it just here, this is what we need you to do? I think, there's a huge awakening where, anybody coming into Africa has to be extremely sensitive, you has to be very, very inclusive, has to be very open-minded, because that's really what the current generation is all about. Yeah.
I think that was one of the things that I observed of how much politics intertwines with your life, and also how knowledgeable and how much you know about it. I feel like in the UK, we can either be very interested in politics or kind of disinterested in it. But just how much politics actually influences your behaviour and the decisions, and even just even some of the brands that you might engage with or the people you will spend your time with, etc. I feel like it's a much bigger part of your lives in that sense.
Well, it is. I think the reason why is because from where we are is that we really want our governments to be able to do what they need to do to make sure that they're providing the necessary things in Africa: good infrastructure, good education, good healthcare, democracy that is proper democracy, and a lot more people are standing up to say this is the kind of governance framework that we want, and African governments are listening. The ones that aren't listening, well. But majority of them are listening, and I would expect that these will continue to happen until Africa gets to a point where some of the things that we would want as Africans are available to us. Yeah.
And what would you say? What impact do you think that has on people when maybe brands are thinking about some of the briefs that they're putting out there, some of the things that they need to think about in terms of the other maybe considerations to put into place?
Always think about, the cultural setup of that specific country. Think about its economic activities, because most of people resonate to things that kind of show them or kind of empower them in one way or the other. Think about, the social fabric of that country. Think about, the demographics, who are the main consumers. Think about who are the influencers of which trends in the country. A lot of it in Africa is driven by music. So who are some of the people that, you can partner with from that standpoint? Think of it from music and drama. Think about it from economic activities. Think of it from a technology standpoint, like how do I drive my message through technology? Because there are a lot of people who are on social media who really, really look at it as, if anything that comes through, they'll have a keen eye in it. So that's the way I would advise. But for you to be able to know which is the best route and which is how to do it, just do a bit of research. Don't be very prescriptive in the manner in which that you do it. And don't assume that because something worked in Kenya, it will automatically work in Nigeria, it will automatically work in South Africa. No. Or it will automatically work in another country. You have to at least go into that country and understand it a bit more intimately. Of course, there's some things that would kind of universally work, but there are certain things that need to be customized to the local context.
Yeah, that was my next question in terms of, I think people are guilty of doing this in terms of thinking of Africa as one country, which obviously it's not.
Yeah.
How much do you think people still do that in terms of think of it as, one country instead of a continent that has, so many variations of cultures, different languages, people that are there?
Yeah. I think by and large, they know that, they're different countries. They just kind of treat them as it's just one country with the exclusion of South Africa. But, Africa is huge. There's the northern part, there's West and Central Africa, there's East Africa, then there's Southern Africa. And as I mentioned before, some of it is similar, but a lot of it is also very different because we are all at different stages of growth, economically, socially, legally. You know, some countries have got more populations than others, so others are different in size. So you have to look at all these factors a bit more keenly by the time you're deciding, to roll out something across all of Africa. The chances of it being successful everywhere with the same methodology is almost impossible. You always have to customize it by a larger degree to fit the local nuances of each market.
So do you think a truly Pan-African brand or product could be ever achieved? Do you think that's a realistic, goal, expectation to work towards, or do you think there's another way we need to be looking at it?
I think it's a big dream. I think it's important. I think if something, if something comes across that unifies all of Africa from a cultural point of view, or at least from, it vibrates as it's seen as, or is completely accepted as this is Africa, that would be a big achievement. But in Africa there's quite a big distinction between North and Sub-Sahara. So it's always good to be aware of those sensitivities. But I do see it happening from a regional level. I can see something happening in East Africa. I can see something happening in Southern Africa. I can see something happening in Western Africa, and I can see something happening in Northern Africa. Yeah.
Are there any brands or products that you can think of that have been able to maybe achieve that kind of regional status, or unify people in a certain way?
Not really. Not to that. Not to that.
So there's still work to be done then.
Yeah, not to that degree. But you do have pockets of influences based on the geographical spread that I shared. Yeah.
Yeah. What would you say are some of the influences then in those areas?
The one that I can think of right now that kind of tends to influence people a lot. Most of it is it's music and culture. It's the one thing that is very, very unifying. You find that majority of us will listen to African music, but it will be Sub-Saharan listening to that kind of music. In North Africa, they'll probably listen to something different. But at least for Sub-Saharan Africa, you're sure that majority of the music, everybody understands it, listens to it, and enjoys it, and also certain levels of food. But when it comes to products that we use, some of the products that we do research on, I haven't seen one.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's work to be done then.
There is a lot of work to be done there.
And any recommendations on music then for people listening?
What would I call it? There's a lot of music Africans love, indigenous African music. So there's Afri-pop, which is quite big at this point, and then a lot of young people resonate to it. There are big artists like Burna Boy, who people love across all of Africa. So those are some of the things.
Okay. This is, I guess it's quite a big question, but what do you see as the future of research in Africa? I guess what would you maybe like to see, or where do you think it's heading? What do you think is the next thing that's going to happen, the next big thing?
I think it's going to be more interactive. I think it's going to be extremely more intimate. It has to be designed in a way where it's conducted in spaces where people are free, where they're themselves. It also needs to take care of all demographics. I think most of the research happens within the larger cities. So it needs to get out of those large cities and get into some of the smaller cities where they still have quite a lot of people with economic ability to be able to afford most of the things that we're doing research on. And really it has to be more consumer focused as opposed to prescriptive. Yeah.
And so finally, any, I guess, recommendations or just advice that you would give to either other agencies or brands that are trying to do research in Africa? What do you think is some of the, I guess, maybe 3 things that they should be thinking about?
I think one of them is just to think about, first of all, have an understanding that African's population is huge, and the population continues to grow, and that the median age, as we were mentioning, is between the ages of 19 to 25. So that's one. Secondly, is that as they're thinking of getting into the African continent or working in the African continent, they need to think about how to be really immersed in the African culture, how to, and the way to do that is to, have teams in Africa, travel to Africa. Don't, come with an open mind. Just be open to learning, be open to really, really getting into the communities and don't sit in big offices. Go to the communities, understand what they do, the economic activities, how they feed their families, how they spend their free time, if they want to, to sit and relax, which are some of the foods that they'll eat, which are some of the drinks they will buy. Understand, in terms of their culture, when they're having a wedding, how do they go about the process? Certain things that will allow you to better appreciate the culture. And then the next thing is that any brand that is not in Africa over the next couple of years will be losing out. That's how I feel from a point of market share, just because the number of people and the economic growth that Africa is seeing at this point is quite tremendous. And anybody who would want to have a brand that or would want to get into that market, this is probably the time to do it. Yeah.
Well, you heard it here first from Kim. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Divergent.
Thank you very much, Bessie. It's a pleasure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your week.